This screencast is going to pick up with the presidency of John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams supported Henry Clay's domestic policies that Clay had run on, including the protective tariffs. So whenever JQA is president, he is going to go ahead and pass a tariff into a law, the Tariff of 1828. Now, remember, a tariff is a tax on imports. The South hates tariffs. They don't feel that they need tariffs, and it just hurts their relationship, their trading partnerships with other countries. So they hate the tariff, and they nicknamed the Tariff of Abominations. Because of this, JQA is going to be pretty unpopular in the South. During his re-election year in 1828, he will not win. Andrew Jackson will win instead. So Andrew Jackson will win the election of 1828 fairly easily. And John C. Calhoun, as pictured on the screen, will be his vice president. Andrew Jackson's supporters begin referring to themselves as Democrats. So something to remember moving forward, because we're going to see the next party division take place because of Andrew Jackson. But they're just starting to call themselves Democrats, and it kind of references the fact that he's like the people's choice. He's who the people like, the masses, and he's ruling what the people want them to do, so they're calling themselves Democrats. Andrew Jackson's presidency is really controversial. We're going to talk about several things that happen in this screencast today that happened during his presidency. The first of which is going to be the spoils system. So Jackson wanted to give the common people a chance to participate in government. He thought common people should be able to access the government and participate if they wanted to. And one way he's going to do this is through the spoils system. And under this, he is going to pick his own friends and supporters to serve in his administration as his cabinet. He's going to pick his own friends to fill his cabinet positions. This sounds pretty common today, in terms of people picking who their political allies are anyway, but Andrew Jackson's kind of picking people who don't necessarily have the qualifications to serve these positions. So by common people, maybe not as fully experienced or qualified. His cabinet will be nicknamed the kitchen cabinet, since they were able to access the White House through the kitchen door, which isn't a literal thing at all. It's more of like a figure of speech in which they are... it's like when you have a friend who you've been friends with for a long time, and like they have their side door that everyone goes through, like the family goes through, or like the front door is very formal. And when you go visit them now, you're like such a close friend or a member of the family, you just come in through the side like they would. I think it's kind of in that regard. Like the cabinet has made their way to the White House in a very informal way. The next issue that happens under Jackson's presidency is the nullification crisis. So in 1832, Congress is going to pass another high tariff. And the South, again, very unhappy. And what the South is going to do is, not the whole South, one state in the South, South Carolina. South Carolina is going to get very sassy, and South Carolina is going to nullify, that's N-U-L-L-I-F-Y, they're going to nullify both the tariffs of 1828 and this new tariff in 1832. South Carolina nullifying the tariff means that they are not going to acknowledge the tariff in their state, and so they're going to basically void it, and they're not going to collect those import taxes, and they also threaten to secede if the federal government tries to make them collect the taxes. And threatening to secede would mean that they will leave the Union if the federal government tries to make them obey the law. Now, the kick of it all is that John C. Calhoun, who is Jackson's vice president, is from South Carolina, and he's like openly supportive of this whole little rebellious move by South Carolina. But Jackson, on the other hand, is not. Now, while Jackson is a man of the people, and he is a Southerner himself, he does not support the idea that South Carolina gets to decide which laws they're choosing to obey or choosing to disobey openly. So he is actually going to have Congress pass the Force Bill, which the Force Bill basically states that the president has the authority to use the military against any state that is not obeying a national law. Things are looking kind of tense in this moment because South Carolina is threatening to leave, Andrew Jackson's threatening to act. We could have a civil war right now, but when you need a compromise, okay, you're going to call Henry Clay, alright? And so we do need a compromise before this gets bad, and Henry Clay is going to propose a compromise tariff, which was referred to as the Tariff Act. It basically called for the gradual reduction of tariffs, so the tariffs would gradually reduce over time. And South Carolina is happy about this because it means that the tariffs are going to eventually go away. So they decide that they're going to start paying the tariffs like they're supposed to again, knowing that they're going to go away. And Jackson's happy because South Carolina is acknowledging that they have to obey the laws. Okay, you do not have to know these names on the slide, so don't stress about that. This just kind of gives you a picture to the story. The next issue that Jackson is met with is the bank war, and this is talking about the National Bank. So if you kind of recall, we were in the second national bank because when Madison was president, it was up for renewal, the National Bank, and they did renew it for a second 20-year charter. So we're in the middle of that charter right now. It's going to be up for renewal again during Jackson's second term, but Jackson doesn't want to wait till the end of the charter. He wants to kill the bill now, or kill the bank now. He basically hates the National Bank, and he wants the National Bank to, he thinks it gives the government too much power, and he wants to get rid of it early. He thinks it's unconstitutional, just like Jefferson thought. So what he does is he has his Secretary of the Treasury remove all of the federal money that's in the National Bank, all of like the money that belongs to the United States government. He has his Secretary of State remove that money and deposit it into state banks, which he's hoping that this kind of massive withdrawal would cause the bank to crash, basically, because it can't support like having so much money taken out of it at once. But it actually doesn't cause the bank to crash, and the bank stays afloat. So instead, it just makes Jackson look really bad. Because it kind of guilts him in the fact that he took too much direct action on this when he should have just let it die in the first place. Now, it will eventually die, the charter will expire, and the National Bank just disappears. It's not renewed again. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is Indian removal. So, as white Americans are beginning to settle in some of the new western territory we've acquired with the Louisiana Purchase and the Ohio River Valley, the white Americans in western states basically want all the Native Americans to be moved west out of their way, beyond the Mississippi River. But they don't want to move. That's their home. Like, imagine how the Native Americans feel. You know, they've been here forever, and all of a sudden these Americans are demanding they be relocated. But Jackson himself, to be honest with you, is a racist. So he basically feels the Native Americans are inferior to the white Americans, and he supports the idea of forcing them to be relocated. So the Indian Removal Act was passed, and the Indian Removal Act provided the federal government with land and funding to move all Native Americans to present-day Oklahoma and Kansas. And if the natives refused, then they would use military force to force them over. Now, one group of Cherokee Indians is actually going to refuse to leave, and they're going to use the court system to challenge this case and basically say, we don't think we should have to be forced out. This is Cherokee that are actually located in Georgia. The Cherokee, again, will challenge their case in law. The case will go all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court actually sides with the Indians and says that the Cherokee don't have to be relocated if they don't want to be. As long as they're being cooperative, they can continue to live in Georgia if that's where they choose to live. Andrew Jackson's response on this is a quote, actually, that you see on your screen. "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." Feel free to pause the screencast for a second and think about what that means. John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. What you can see is that Andrew Jackson has absolutely no intention of following through with what the Supreme Court case has decided. The Supreme Court has no power to enforce the decision they've made. It's the president's job to enforce the law. But because he's not going to, he instead is going to force the Cherokee off of their land anyway. They will walk what has become known today as the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, where a large number of them actually died along the way. Very, very sad, and a negative view of Andrew Jackson as president. We will look at his impact as president in class on Monday and wrap up to a good stopping point for the quiz. Please write down any questions you have, and I will see y'all on Monday.